Welcome to the Liberation Lab podcast, insights and interviews for the disruptive educator. I am honored to have my guest, but I'm going to allow her to introduce herself. Why don't you tell the people who you are, what you do, and why you do it?
First of all, Bobby, I'm appreciating like the delineation between who you are
Yeah,
and what
yeah.
you do. That feels like home. That feels like home to me. I often will share that like even my response to or like my capacity to like respond to like I am like as a phrase is like a gauge for me as it relates to like my own presence
Yeah.
because my response to who are you like shifts, I'm gonna be honest, like daily in this season.
Right.
And so if I had to respond to the question, who am I today? Uh I am a portal and a vessel, in the like most literal sense, in that as of today's recording, my husband and I are 29 weeks pregnant, and so that's an identity, right? That's an identity that has become more and more salient for me. Like just being a
Okay, okay.
vessel, a portal. I feel like, in the spiritual sense, so trusted, like by God and our ancestors, like to just be
Mm,
operating in this capacity. Um,
mm,
I am I am striving to let it be. And so I'm in this season of like flow. It is an affirmation that I am prioritizing like for this week.
mm,
I am someone who is forever just sort of like learner, unlearner,
mm.
contending with just like my own understandings of success and productivity, um, capacity. I am realizing I didn't even lead with my name.
I was told.
Brittany Janay. Emphasis on the three syllables. People ask me all the time, like, is it Brittany or is it Brittany? And my mother affirms that it is absolutely Brittany. And so I honor her in how I share of myself. I am Black
Yeah.
woman, mother, wife, caregiver. Um, I am daughter and granddaughter. Um, I am lover of Black folk, which
Mm,
absolutely influences how I show up in equity,
mm,
justice, liberation
mm,
work. Um, I am, and I ain't even trying to sound cliche, y'all, but I am my ancestors' wildest dreams, and I know that, feel that like intimately, as
mm,
over the past year, our family experienced the transition of two of our patriarchs. And so, lineage and remembering, um, homage has just been top of mind for me in this season. I am creator of Liberated Love Notes, critical self
mm,
reflections, and affirmations for the culture, which is an affirmations card deck that started out as love notes, affirmations for myself, for my now husband, for my father, as we contended with what it meant to be in or what it means to be Black in systems that were not
mm, mm,
created with us in mind. And then personally was also a byproduct of me developing a practice that felt nourishing as a Black woman also doing the work of equity, justice, inclusion, because it's heavy and it's a lot. And oftentimes, there is not enough space, or sometimes it can feel like there's not enough space to nourish oneself and replenish oneself as we sort of are out there doing and being the work. I am also founder, steward of and loving accountability, coaching and consulting, which was an expansion of Liberated Love Notes. And my very intentional decision to shift My focus in equity and justice work to specifically serve and support Black folks as we show up, certainly in oppressive systems, but then also Black folks as we show up as entrepreneurs and leaders and folks who are stewards and creators of systems. For most of my career, I spent I spent in the equity and inclusion space facilitating, uh,
Mhm.
curating learning experiences that absolutely, I'm just going to name it, centered the enlightenment of white folks, centered the sort of
Mm.
curiosities and um, expansion of white folks in this work, which is necessary work. And one of my tracks as a practitioner was that there were very few spaces that were safe enough, that were loving enough, that felt like us enough, where we could also contend with our unlearning and reimagining and remembering work. um, Today, I have the pleasure of also serving as Director of People, Culture, and Accountability with a Black led equity justice consulting firm based in the Houston, Texas area. So, yeah, that's a little bit about me, what I do. Like, at the core of like my why is this belief, this knowing that Black people deserve to experience love, loving spaces. Black people deserve to feel affirmed and be trusted without explanation. And that there is, opportunity in how we imagine that vision, like in the most incremental ways, whether it's in how I parent, whether it's in how I lead, whether it's how I am in partnership with other practitioners, whether it's in, how I facilitate and certainly do the work. I hope I got to those three questions with all of that,
No,
Bobby.
no, really.
That's who I am, what I do, and the why.
You know, a part of so I've been rocking with you for a while from a distance, just following, gleaning, learning, seeing, observing. Um, so just as a backstory for me, I kind of popped on the I'll say the IG scene, Teachergram and other spaces, and I did that obviously where most of us did it in the wake of 2020
Mm,
and all of the carnage that we saw.
mm,
Um, for me, I didn't even know I was going to do with the page. All I knew was my people aren't free,
mm,
and so I started just sharing quotes from folks, trying to encourage, just trying to pass on the wisdom of our ancestors on and say, listen,
mm,
this is some things that I think can resonate with us. And so came across just from connecting with folks your page a long time ago, and I was like, oh, I got to get these cards. Uh,
mm,
and and
mm,
for me, one of the things that really drew me was your conviction. This is me from the outside looking in. Your conviction that love is central to liberation. It's obviously in your name, but I think it's a part of your practice and a part of what you do, even in your coaching, consulting work. So I want to start really like baseline for people who are listening, and I want to ask you: when you say love, what do you mean?
mm. So, when I say love, what do I mean? I want to first honor that most of my, or tribute, sort of just like my lineage, my love lineage to just experientially to what I experienced from Corey and Loretta. That's my parents.
Hmm.
Um, what I
Hmm.
experienced from my grandparents. And so when I think about love, when I say about love, when I say love, when I am imagining what it looks like, feels like, I can't not mention Corey and Loretta's sort of affirming and present love. And so affirming and present love. Like just cause, like just inherent, like something that I've always felt deserving of. I ain't have to do, I ain't have to, I didn't have to earn it, but like it's just something that I felt deserving of. When I speak about love, I cannot mention Elmer and Lucille. That's my maternal grandparents. They're enduring and like faithful love. And so I can't divorce like love from my spiritual self. And as much as
Mm.
colonialism and anti blackness would have us think that those can't exist or we shouldn't, those will belong in the workplace or in the school. When I think about love, I am referring to this faithful, this spiritual love that connects me to something that is beyond myself. When I think about love and how I've experienced it, I'm referring to the love modeled by Lula and Lewis, which was a love that looked like provision and like doing and like meeting tangible needs, all of
Mm.
which I feel like can show up in system. Love as a practice should be affirming and present and felt, like just cuz we should revere like the inherent humanity of the people and communities, students that we serve. Love is deeply like spiritual and hopeful. And I ain't talking about like toxically optimistic. I'm talking about the kind of hope that understands, the kind of faith that like understands that in as much as these systems may have like a hold on us, or like may feel like they absolutely have a hold on us, there's also some like intrinsic power like in me and something greater, whether it is my ancestral lineage, whether it's people who have come before me, like whether it is my gifts and talents that I have access to. um that love around provision is like, yeah, we also need to be doing and like meeting the tangible needs of the people that we serve, um as said and told by them, right? And so that is what I mean. That's what I experience. That is like what the lineage behind love. I also cannot mention the work of Bell Hooks, who was critical to my understanding of love, certainly beyond the feeling, but understanding its connection to like uprooting systems, right? Like to love is to unlearn. You know what I mean? Like to love
Mm-hmm.
is to
Mm-hmm.
be deliberate in discerning harmful systems, policies, practices, and doing the work to reimagine different. Um, to love is not just to feel, it is to look for daily opportunities to trust, to show care, to show affection, to be committed, to recognize, the fullness of who we are. That's what I mean when I say, when I refer to love, or at least that's the story behind it. That is the story behind love as it shows up in practice and hopefully through me.
The thing I think about often is that, when we talk about love, the and we just say the word, for
Mhm.
many folks, it's going to conjure up certain types of feelings depending on
Mhm.
what kind of love you've been sold. Does that make
Ooh,
sense?
yeah.
So
Mhm.
like when I
Mhm.
say my students, right, when I walk through my hallways as an assistant principal, I say that not to tout my position, but to say they have an understanding of what that role looks like. So
Mhm.
for me, when I walk through and I'm like, give me a hug, yo, how are you? That might be jarring for some of my students because
Mhm.
in that role they haven't seen love exist
That's
with the position of an AP. They
mhm.
haven't seen love exist in the position of teacher. Love exists in the
That's
position
so
of
yeah.
peer. And
That's
so this redefining, if you will, this unlearning that you speak of, it makes me like we can go down this because I'm like you in the sense of reflecting in the moment and then kind of
Mhm.
going with my thoughts. And so I think we'll probably do that throughout this recording. But I want to ask you, just as a launching point for that discussion that I think we can get into, about your schooling experience,
Yeah.
and while love was at home, was love in school?
That's such a good question. Was Yeah, love was at home, but was love at school? So when I think about some of the like critical experiences in I'm gonna start with elementary school. One of the ones that comes up for me. I had to have been like in third grade, thinking this was like an English class because we were writing like acrostic poems. You know those poems that are like vertical. B is for B, R is for R. I remember, Bobby, I got down to it was either the B or the A, and I either wrote like Black American for the B or either like African American for the A. I can't recall, but I was like very clearly like naming my identity in my poem.
Hmm.
And I remember my teacher at the time was like, it's just American. That's what it was. So it was the A. It had to have been the A. She was like, you don't need to write African American. It's just American. You're just American. Just say American. That was such a of like all my that's like one of the experiences that I recall most from elementary school. And I remember one like, well, my dad says otherwise. You know what I mean? I remember like being in this like in conflict between what one adult was telling me, a teacher, an authority figure was telling me based in what I was learning at home. But then also now that I think about it, probably also like contending with the fact that I just affirmed who I was and somebody just told me, nah, you not. That's not loving.
That ain't
You
it.
know, that's not at, so small
Right.
so small but not small, right? Like if love is affirming in school spaces, then love like allows young people and students to be seen as they want to be seen. Um, so that's an experience that comes up for
Hmm.
me. I remember going home being really upset. Like I remember that impacted me so much that I told my dad, I was like, I just can't understand. I just could not understand. And so, in the spirit of love, he actually went up to the school the next day. He actually went up to the school the next day. And so now I'm thinking about, wow, like just the power of like the blessing of advocacy and love showing up as, um, I am going to make sure you feel seen and heard. I
Yeah.
am your advocate, right? And so again, that was home. But certainly in that experience at school, that didn't feel
Hmm.
loving, right? So that's one sort of like elementary school experience that comes up for me as it relates to love in action or love perhaps not being present, right? Um, when I think about something else that comes up, I don't know why middle school like feels like really gray and like I can rarely ever think back to middle school, but one
Hmm.
of my sort of like schooling experiences in high school or maybe the transition to high school as it relates to love was really around like narratives that I started to like learn around what spaces were better than others. And so after middle
Hmm.
school, yeah, so after middle school, it was a whole thing to like apply to different high schools, like magnet schools and like I remember there being a narrative, and so maybe this was middle school from 8th grade to ninth grade, that there were certain schools that you should, go to because they were more quote unquote diverse and would prepare you for the real world. Now, in that
Hmm.
context, I was living in an area where the schools were predominantly black, like the zone schools were predominantly black. Um, but this sort of narrative around you should apply to that school because it's more diverse was very much so. You should apply to that school because it's more white. To like thinking back, you should apply to that school because there's more white kids there. you should apply to that school because you need to be around white people in
Mm-hmm.
order to be successful post school. Now, what narrative does that cultivate as it relates to self love? You know what I mean? And how I then
Mm-hmm.
start to understand, proximity to my community must suggest some sort of like pathology or inferiority, lack of preparedness, whereas proximity to whiteness must suggest preparedness, success, how, love was, it's a lot of those narratives were perhaps around like self love or, you know, what I was internalizing at the time related to, my blackness. Whereas, in as much as it probably was in conflict with what I was learning at home, was very much so salient. You know what I mean? And part of
Mm-hmm.
my learning and understanding of what it meant to be successful, right? And so, again, if love is intended to be affirming, if love is intended to meet us you know, where we are strong, if love is community, right? Then certainly we can't be perpetuating narratives that suggest that you can only be successful when you are in community with people who are not like you. Wow, that was a significant. I had just said I don't remember middle school, but now that I think about it, that was in between that like middle school to high school, right? Which feels like a
Yeah.
significant transition time as a young person.
It absolutely is. You have my mind going a million places with how you even mentioned how even the building, the setup of the space, the setup
Mm,
of what parts of the building were for what people and what things were offered in
mm,
certain spaces, like how even that communicates a level
mm,
of love or
mhm,
disregard and what our
mhm,
students get from that.
mhm,
And then the second thing is how often um, our young people, black students particularly, are told that they have to, that their blackness in and of itself doesn't mean anything unless it has a white stamp next to it.
mm. Hello. Mhm,
That unless you get that white badge of honor via
mhm,
your academics, unless you get that white badge of honor via your um, you know, your proximity to, who are your instructors, who are your teachers, did somebody that is white affirm you?
mhm,
Okay, now you
mhm,
have in value, now you have dignity, now you have X, Y, and Z, and how much that is baked into the educational system itself. Um,
mhm. Look, Bobby, I'm over here
yeah,
looking for
yeah,
because this like, and we carry this into right. We carry this into our workplaces. We carry this into how we then engage with young people once we become adults. Let me just be
that part.
real. The teacher I talked about, the teacher from third grade was a black woman. You don't need that African. You know what I mean? Just right. So I was actually, so as you were speaking, I'm thinking about, I'm like, there's a liberated love note for that. I'm thinking about that again, um, the how love like looks like, for us very practically engaging in this, you know, um un unlearning work. Like this unlearning work around what we've been sold as to how we should see ourselves. Here it is. Here it is. I strive to unapologetically build community with other Black folks at work and beyond. I reject notions that suggest Black spaces are taboo or insignificant, when in fact they are necessary to my ability to thrive. And
Mm,
so that makes me think about, so in the spirit of schooling, and now I'm kind of jumping to college, my experience at Howard, right? Like
mm,
the
mm,
right, like that's like a jump in it. That makes me reflect on When you talk about where I experience like love, for me, it's unfortunate, but I think it probably felt more tangible and present in the context of my HBCU experience. It wasn't perfect and certainly beyond reproach because we got our stuff
Mm-hmm.
too, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I would say that that is where I experience the beauty and diversity of blackness, right? Where I
Mm.
experienced elders and professors who didn't see me as a number, but saw me as like the human, the person to get to know. I recall
Mm-hmm.
literally senior year trying to get validated. I think I owe probably like a good, maybe like $3,000 that I ain't know I even, I'm talking about like a month before graduation. And Professor
Mm.
Thornhill finding that money somewhere. I don't know where she got, but like feeling committed and invested enough. I wasn't
Mm.
irresponsible. It wasn't about me. You should have been on it, or you should have more. I just I felt like enough and sort of like deserving of support and seen, right? Provision.
Mm.
Love as provision.
Those experiences, not only do they communicate something, but they're almost the syllabus, if you will, that
Mm.
we learn from and then we take with us into life. So now I'm thinking about all the people who have come through, and I'm going to, hone us in here on the K to 12 experience just for a second
Yeah.
to say that there are a lot of educators who have had false ideas or incomplete ideas of what love is.
Mm.
And so when they come into their own as a teacher and they are grown and they are talking to a student, things come out like, or ideas come out like, you should be seen and not heard. Ideas come out like,
Ooh.
l- let me police how you're doing this. Let me be hard
Mm.
on you because the world is going to be tough, and if I'm harder, then I'm preparing you for this world because
Ooh.
that's love. I'm not going to take it easy on you, quote unquote. I'm not going to give you a pass. The world isn't going to give you a pass, right? and
What?
so and so we set up these harsh, punitive structures, and we say it's loving because we're trying to
To
prepare
protect.
students for a world that
Mm-hmm.
should not exist. Our world should not exist as is, but it does. And we're saying that's the best way. That's the most loving way to
Mm-hmm.
prepare students. And so let's say I'm that educator, right? I sat down with you and I said to you, Brittany, let me put three, Brittany,
Mm-hmm.
uh, want to honor you. I'm the educator that is doing these things. I believe it is loving because my students are prepared for life and leadership beyond K to 12, and that's my goal. So I do need to be hard and I do need to be these things. And they might not like it now, but it prepares them for the world. So I am loving. What do you say to an educator who says that or is convinced of that position?
I wonder. I wonder. Um, who does that serve? You know what I mean? Like who
Mm,
does, when I think about the example of being seen and not heard,
hmm
right? Like who
hmm
does that serve? Does that serve the imagination of the child, or does that serve the status quo like as it is? Right? Like so who does that serve? When I think about what it means, that sort of like the inclination to, I need to be hard on you because the world the world won't cut you a break. Like who does that serve? Does it serve like the humanity of a young person who deserves to feel vulnerable and ask questions
mm,
and
mm,
try and not feel like it's the end of the world? Or does it serve the sort of current status quo and system that ain't gonna see their humanity anyway, right? Like who does that like really, really serve? I also wonder And this would require just a certain degree of like intrapersonal work. In what ways
Mm.
like did that serve you? And by you, I mean not like your career, because that's different. You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? Not like your success, but just like who you are at your core. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I love
Mm-hmm.
that you mentioned so I think about even like the question why, and how, and as much as I experience live at home, I do remember the norm that like it was sometimes disrespectful to like ask adults like why. Like you remember like or an expected response. Like to ask that
'Cause I
question.
said so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who does
Yeah.
that serve? So much so that I have a 6 year old who is a very empowered 6 year old. Um, and I share with folks that when it comes to Braxton, you know, his questions and his whys are less of an affront and like more of a love language. Like that's how I try to position it. You know what I mean? I'm assuming curiosity. You know what I mean? Like I'm assuming he like
Mm.
wants to know. I'm building his capacity to like imagine and challenge within boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
certainly, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
also would
Mm-hmm.
I also would invite, educators and teachers to like consider, what reframes, like what intentional like reframes might be needed in order for love to show up differently, for them. I never want to suggest that someone is necessarily wrong or bad just because of what they've learned. And
Mm-hmm.
I do think we have to be accountable to just like our own interrogation and unlearning and healing work, right? And so what might be possible if I experience love not just through the lens of needing to protect, but through the lens of
Mm.
needing to affirm and nurture and like grow. Because I'm not suggesting that love isn't intended to protect, but if that's the only vantage point, you know what I mean? That if that's the only way that you experience love to protect, then
Mm-hmm.
naturally you're going to experience love as, a control. You know what I mean? Versus
Mm-hmm.
sort
Mm-hmm.
of, you know, connection, gateway, all of those things, right? I wonder. I wonder, like, how we could, or I would invite them to wonder what would it look like to
Mm.
reframe beyond love through the lens of protection, prevention.
You you know
Um,
what's dope
yeah.
about? Sorry. No, you just had my mind going. So you know what's dope about even just what you said is it's an invitation to walk in your imaginatory, like your imagination, right? It's an
Mm,
invitation to free yourself from what is as your only
mhm,
operating mechanism. It's something that I reflect on often because uh, I position all everything that I do under the framing of liberation, and then often it challenges me because I know that my imagination is something that I continuously have to work on.
mhm,
I continuously have to
mhm,
reflect and grow in. So if I like that teacher who is doing and can and in the practice that is harming students by saying this is loving to them, um this is quote tough love and all the things that we say.
mm,
I,
mhm,
I think about it in the I think about it this way. Love is not just how you define it, it is also how you communicate it.
mhm,
Right. So it's almost like it is a communication strategy because it's not just what I say, it's how you hear it.
mhm,
Um if I were to right now there's a chat feature where as we're recording, and if I were to type in something and I put a whole bunch of exclamation points after it, that says something different
mhm,
than if I were to type something and no exclamation points, and then what if I did it
mhm,
again and put all caps? Like all of it says something different. There's an
mhm,
emotional response behind it. And so I say all that to say this: a teacher who is based in that type of framing and that understanding, is it possible that you could achieve the preparation and furthering of that young
Mm,
person without degrading their soul?
mm,
Is it possible that you could walk into your school, your classroom, and empower and prepare and put them on
mm.
game, like I like to say, right? Like put them on game. This is what the world is going to do,
Mhm,
but in such a way that says, I honor your whole person,
mhm,
all of who you are, all of what you bring to the table. I honor all of that and say, this is how you can leverage. This is something. And here's the other part: love is honest, truthful.
mhm,
Love confronts. So,
mhm,
so in that way, how could I confront the pieces that need to be confronted in such a way that says, nah, I'm not against you. Like, I'm
mhm,
actually for you.
mhm.
I'm gonna tell him myself, and then I want to kick it back to you. I'm gonna tell him myself. Just yesterday, at the time of this recording,
Mhm,
just yesterday, I'm sitting with a young person who, for whatever reason, is dysregulated and not choosing to listen to and follow certain expectations. I'm in the assistant principal seat. So by the time it gets to me, oh, it's time to move on some things
mhm,
because it's gotten to that level. That doesn't mean that every time it's a suspension, every time it's some consequence, but there does something needs to happen. You follow me?
mhm,
And so I have this young lady who is just in the hallway. She ain't going to class. She don't care about class, and then she gonna tell you what you can do with your opinions. That's
mhm.
her where she's at right now. So you know, she communicates clearly. We'll say it that way. And this young lady is in my hallway. She's trying to use passes and things that she created. Like she is using all her brilliance for all the wrong reasons at this point. And I'll be honest, it's right before spring break. I'm I'm tired. You hear me? Tired. And this young lady is tap dancing on my last nerve. Now, when I am walking her to my office, and mind you, she tore up some stuff in my office. Because she's that dysregulated at this point. When I walk her to go to her parent and all of that, she's like, "I'm not going unless you give me my letter. Tell me what the consequence is." Da, 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 da. Like, why are you doing this? So she's asking a bunch of questions, and at this point, I'm mad. My patience is gone, and I turn to her and I say, "Cause I said so. That's why." And I meant every word of it. You hear me? I'm I'm just telling on myself now. And in that moment of impatience, in that moment where I am, and don't get me wrong, I think there's a lot of reasons where I could justify that. I look
Mhm,
back and I'm like, man, what if in that moment I turned to
mhm.
that young lady and I said, outside of this moment, outside of all of that you're feeling right now, and you have a right to feel it, have I been dishonest with you? Have I
Mm.
been have I been someone who hasn't given you the opportunity to succeed? Someone who hasn't shown you that they care? Has that been what I've been to you outside of this moment? And I'd like to think, for the most part, you're gonna have people are always gonna think about the extremes. I'd like to think in that moment that that child is gonna turn to me and be like, "Nah, you have been fair."
Mhm.
And it's going to bring them back just a little bit. And I say, all right, well, can you trust me enough to just walk with me to the
Mm.
office, and then we can talk about what happens after that. But can you trust me enough in this moment? Now, there's going to be a bunch of people who hear that and say, I ain't doing that.
I got
I ain't
that.
got time for that.
Mm. Wow,
Um,
yeah. This makes me think about the role of like capacity. So
hmm,
even as you were describing um, what you interpreted as the student or young person like feeling deregulated or dysregulated, you were also experiencing that in response to this scenario.
100%.
Like,
Oh
I'm just thinking
yes.
about how I be like with my like my cherry. You were also experiencing that, and it takes a certain degree of. Cause I'm thinking about how much you would need to pause. Like you're thinking back now, but imagine if you were able to facilitate a moment of just like pause. I don't know, in the ways it all somewhere to
Yeah.
invite that perspective that you're offering now, like in the
In the
moment.
moment.
And it also assumes that you have capacity for it, right? And so I also want to just honor that because there's always systems and like other things at play that influence just like our capacity. It would be dishonest and
Absolutely.
to not even name that,
Yeah.
especially as it relates to, you know, educators and leaders who are working in spaces that are under, funded and
Hmm.
so I just want to like even name like capacity has a lot to do with that. Space to
Hmm.
pause has a lot to do with that. I love when you even mentioned, when you said you wondered or you thought about asking the student, have you, or like having the student reflect on their experiences with you. I also wondered what an invitation around like just like what do you need? Like just needs, right? I've been having the pleasure, and I don't think I mentioned this earlier, of engaging in some work with our local district here, um, in partnership with another Black woman led equity firm. And the entire body of work is themed under power to the young people. I might actually try to find
Hmm.
how they define that because I think it could be powerful to just like affirm and lift up with your community here. But we had a whole segment around inviting the young people, inviting their needs to the space. Like, what do you need
Hmm.
from us, just like as adults? You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like the simplest things from when I say I got to use the bathroom, like, let me use the bath. Like the simplest things. Like, believe me when I say that, like, I need to relieve myself. Believe me when I say, in the context of us, like, building clubs with them, that this is something that I think would be innovative and responsive to student needs. Believe me when I say I need a moment, even though my I need a moment might not sound like I need a moment, because I have the language or emotional
Hmm.
intelligence to actually say I need a moment. It actually might look like me wilding out, a little bit, but interpret that as, perhaps a need, like for space, for time, not necessarily like throwing me away, you know? And so just like the question of after pause,
Hmm.
what exactly do you need? Like what in this moment, like do you need? And it maybe it's questions answered because it sounds like the journey was questions answered. I'm gonna give you a moment to write those down. And once
Yeah.
I've had time to regulate, I'm gonna come back to those. But right now, we
Yeah.
go ahead to the office.
Yeah. Yeah. It was one of
So
those moments. We were pressed for time too. Like
yeah,
transition was about to
it's
happen.
like that.
And she's like, nah, I ain't doing that. Matter of fact, I'm walking out this office. I don't even care what it's one of those type
Yeah,
of moments. And and rarely does a power struggle work out for both parties. Someone's gonna lose out. I as an adult know, like at the end of the day, I get to go home. I get to hug my wife. I get to kiss my babies. I get to ask them about their day. And I don't know what happens for this child when they leave here. Do you know what I mean? Like I get to shut this down. And at least first, I get the privilege of being able to choose to do that. And this is all in reflection now because this is something
Yeah.
I've been thinking about today because it just happened yesterday. But my thought is having the having the wisdom to pause.
Mm-hmm.
taking a second, and in that second, 5 seconds, 30 seconds, whatever it is, can you create the space for love
Mhm.
in that moment? Doesn't mean that love has to look like this very docile,
Mhm.
this very
Mhm.
flimsy, pliable, uh, push over kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. This is. Mhm.
Love is dynamic enough to be loving confrontation, to be
Mhm.
to be loving honesty, to be loving and demanding,
Accountability.
loving and
Mhm.
accountability.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Um, which I think, and this is where I want to go, and then I want to kind of push us to your work to plug some stuff and things like that. But I think about it in this way: love has to be central to liberation, and love has to be central to the way we embody leadership.
Mhm.
Right? I know that that's true. I believe that's true, but I know you believe it's true because
Mhm.
it's all over your website. It's all through the,
Mhm.
I like to do research, and you talk about embodying these things. You don't talk about it as a skill or a practice like clothes you could put on. You talk about it in terms of how do you walk in it as an existence.
Mhm.
So talk to us a little bit about that. Let's say you've huddled the Liberation Lab community around, and we're sitting down and we're gleaning from your wisdom right now. This is me, trying to honor
Mhm.
you. And you are giving us the keys, if you will, some key things we need to take away in terms of how do we lead from a place of love. What are some things that we
Mhm.
should be thinking through?
So I want to lift up one uh, a woman who I had the pleasure of leading, where she actually reflected back to me, Brittany, like I experience like your leadership as a love practice. And so
Hmm.
I just want to shout out Tammy because she's the one who also just like gave me the language
Hmm.
um, to name my intentions and also like affirm the impact. When I think about embodying leadership as a love practice, I'm glad you lifted up power
Yeah.
because at its core, especially like as someone who is a leader, as a teacher, as a principal, there is a significant amount of power that we experience. Leading as a love practice is a deliberate, ongoing, looking for opportunities to redistribute that power. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? In some like tangible ways, whether it is in how we plan, whether it is in space to talk and speak your truth. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like whether it is in, just like some really, really tangible ways, like access to like funds and visibility, but like this I am deliberately looking for ways to redistribute, take some of this power that I have access to and shift it to young people,
Hmm.
shift it to those of whom I am in community. And so leading from a love practice at its core is a redistribution of power. Leading as a love practice for me also means being mindful of and accountable to how power may have like harmed or caused harm. Maybe you feel like you ain't have nothing to do with it, but your students may have experienced harmful teachers, or your direct reports may have experienced harmful leaders. Um, your other young people who you're in community with may have experienced harmful adults.
Hmm.
You are accountable to that, right? And so leading from a love practice means recognizing that some of the work is around like rebuilding trust and
Yeah.
repairing harm that you don't even feel directly responsible for, right?
Yeah.
And not because I've experienced this before, making folks, young people, like feel bad or have to like over explain, why they may be, showing up as they are because of harm they've experienced. I feel accountable too. So I'm going to put in the extra hard work of rebuilding trust, right? I'm not expecting you to just trust me. I recognize that power has a history that I too am accountable for. When I think about leading as a love practice, I'm also inviting folks to identify ways to actively interrupt, norms, right? And so whether it is in the context of young people, affirming authenticity in some really beautiful ways, like affirming like who they are. I think about how a lot of times life preparedness, college preparedness, high school preparedness has this undertone of assimilation or needing to
Yes.
change.
Yes.
But leading, as a or embodying leadership as a love practice is really about affirming like the inherent gifts that are there, the
Mm.
strengths that are there, focusing on that, creating space where authenticity can thrive and not necessarily be seen as like an affront. I've been thinking about, I'll talk a little bit more about the work with the young people here, but like we have them doing impact projects. And so part of that is like pitching and speaking. And
Mm.
I remember the advice I used to receive around like dialect, like, and how I need to sound and how I
Yeah.
can't use or shouldn't use colloquialisms. I
Yeah.
refuse. Bobby, I refuse for that to be the angle that I collude with in community with young people, and see my role as someone to like really interrupt some of the harmful narratives around what it means to be professional or sound like a leader. Embodying leadership as a love practice
Mm.
takes on that responsibility of interrupting rather than like, colluding with. Um, and then I want to mention one more thing because it made me
Please.
think about your story around accountability, right? And so embodying leadership as a love practice looks like accountability because we're not going to always get it right. But I think about how valuable it is to hear, or how valuable it was to hear an adult apologize
Yeah.
when they didn't get it right. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
this how, or someone in power like apologize and like really strive to repair, repair harm or like repair the relationship. Perhaps they noticed that they didn't respond in the way that they should have, that was aligned with their values and intentions,
Yep.
but like went
Yep.
back to, because we ain't gonna always get it. And so
Ain't always going.
accountability, we ain't gonna always get it. And so love looks like accountability. I am able to discern where my intentions and impact did not align, and I go
Mm.
back. Those are some of the things that I would invite folks to consider, just like very tangibly, as what it means to like lead or embody leadership as a love practice. And that's just not, none of that is limited to the school environment. And I think
Yeah.
that is, that not even think, when I talk about embodiment, right, I'm really referring to like this practice that shows up whether I am in home and how I engage with my son or my partner, or in community, or with like practitioners. That's work, right? You know what? That's work. I think it takes me out of the intellectual and like really forces me to contend with like, okay, like even the feelings that come with that. It's hella uncomfortable sometimes to have to apologize to a child. You know what I mean? And that's the right. It's like to contend with like even how I'm feeling when,
Yeah, man.
wait, you're expecting me? You're mad at me because of how another adult or another leader treated you? Like there's a certain degree of just like humility and like
Yep.
required in that work.
To your point, there is a communal responsibility
Mm,
that if we're corporately walking in love, then we assume the
mhm.
responsibility of, right?
Yeah.
I think about it. Like, I believe it was Ijoma Alu in her
Mm.
work. So you want to talk about race? Boom,
Mhm.
got it. So in her work, she was talking, using this analogy of, imagine like a woman walking through a crowd, and a person hits her on the arm. And she continues to walk, and another
Mm.
person hits her on the arm. She continues to walk, and another person hits her on the arm, and she starts to flinch before anybody swings, because she's been conditioned to believe that the next person coming is going to do the same
Mm.
thing. And that is what our structures have done, what our structures have produced. And specifically with regard to most of my audience, educators, that is what the educational system has done to young people.
Mhm.
They are flinching before they get
Mhm.
hit.
Mhm. Wow.
And
Yeah.
and with that, right, we have to assume a corporate role, a communal role, if you will,
Mhm.
in accepting responsibility for harm that we may not have personally caused.
Mhm.
But because we represent an entity that has produced
Mhm.
harm, your position of teacher now comes with a laundry list of things that have to
Mhm.
be unlearned and healed.
Mhm.
And part of our role is to
Mhm.
assume responsibility for that, to name it, call it out in front of our young people, place
Mhm.
it in front of them and say, this isn't what I want our community to be. So, what can
Mhm.
we reimagine this
Mhm.
space to be?
Mhm.
Invite their genius in, invite them into the
Mhm.
space to redesign, reimagine, reconstruct, if you will, what this space could look like. And then hold yourself accountable, love, to walking in, embodying the things that you have corporately come together to create. And that's going to take a lot of humility out of folks,
Mhm.
because I did my time. I got my degree.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
did the things. I survived all. And
Mhm.
that's ultimately what we're saying, is I survived the structures as is. I
Mhm.
don't have to lift a finger. I did it already. And it's like, yeah, you did. But the fact that you survived and not thrived, it means we have work to do so
Hello.
that people can
Hello.
thrive in our structures
Mhm.
and not just walk through it hoping that they make it to the other side.
Mhm.
So I want
Mhm.
to say this, and I want to ask you, this. I think about, and this is in real time, and I say this continually because I truly believe it, and I try to walk in it and embody it. It is, if you are listening to someone talk about justice, liberation, equity, anything along those lines, and they are always giving you advice and are never telling you where they're personally reflecting, growing, or are
Mhm.
challenged, I
Mhm.
need you to listen to someone else.
Mhm.
For me, in this moment, as much as I believe in the power, hello Luther, of
Mhm.
love, I I'm acknowledging that I walk in it imperfectly, and therefore
Mhm.
have to assume loving accountability in the work that I'm doing, even now, presently, as we are one day away from spring break, and these kids are
Mhm.
on my last nerve. You hear me? That
Mhm.
is where I'm at presently. So here's where I want to kick it to you. And I want to ask two questions. So I'll ask one and then we'll go to the second. My first question is, as someone who is leading a practice of encouraging others to embody love, what is the biggest, most common misnomer that we have about love? What is the biggest thing we need to
Mhm.
unlearn?
So I would say um, that the biggest thing that we must unlearn is that it starts with or assumes uh, external, sort of like that love is outward. Um,
Hmm.
that this like practice, fundamentally has more to do with like how I show up with others more than anything. You know what I mean? Like this is an external This is solely like in the external, how I engage with others. And I say that as someone, I'm appreciating what you said about like where you are struggling, right? I say that as someone who has um, experienced love, you know, as something that I'm doing for others in service of
Mm,
others,
mhm, mhm,
love as acting on behalf of others
mhm,
without necessarily like honestly, like truly sitting with how that shows up through sort of like me and my understanding of self.
mm,
Um it's not right. So yes, love is communal. Absolutely, and has communal and systemic impact. And there is this intrapersonal work
mm,
and like
mm,
reckoning that also feels, if not requisite, because I don't want to suggest that it has to be perfect before you get to like loving others,
mhm,
but it's certainly fundamental,
mhm,
right? I think about all the ways in which my capacity to show up in some of the loving ways that we named has a lot to do with the extent to which I'm feeling just like present and full and like whole, like my damn
mm,
self, right?
mm, mhm,
Experiencing clarity around who
mhm,
I am. You know what I mean? Like experiencing
mhm,
clarity around like what I've learned. And
mhm,
so I don't know if it's like, I wouldn't even, it's not just self love. You know what I mean? Because I don't necessarily want to delineate them. Because I
mhm,
think love just, and I don't know that there's always enough sort of like focus on the like vertical, right?
mm,
In the context of love. And that feels
mm,
significant. You know, even when I
mm.
was thinking through the language of in loving accountability,
Ability, yeah.
I one of the um one of the definitions I ended with was this ongoing commitment to an intrapersonal reckoning, like the
Mm,
me work. You know what I mean? Like the very
mhm,
uncomfortable work. And
mhm,
so,
mhm,
yeah, absolutely. How we show up in community, how we show up with others, how we show up in systems. And let's also not um, overstep or like understate rather the sort of like intrapersonal,
mhm,
vertical work that
mhm.
is significant, just as significant.
It's the risk in that is that we would exhaust ourselves on a treadmill of performance for others
Mm-hmm.
and failing to embody
Mm-hmm.
those principles ourselves. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Where we're running really, really hard, um, and attempting to get to a goal, but you know what a treadmill does. You can run really
Yeah.
fast, but you're in the same place.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm like, I'm just thinking about how a lot of this work for me came from really getting curious about what I learned. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? And like
Hmm.
where I came from and who I came from. Getting really honest about how I see myself and my
Hmm.
body and how harmful systems and norms have influenced that,
Yeah.
right? The extent to which I even see myself as human and like worthy, like that language of
Yeah.
deserving, right? Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely has influenced how I experience others and their worthiness and
Mm,
deservingness.
mm,
Um, so yeah, it ain't just about how we want you to show up with others. Like, let's do and be the work ourselves. Yeah.
Brittany, I want to make sure I honor all those syllables because I really do honor you. Um, I want to thank you, man. I want to thank you because like I said, I've been rocking for a while and following and even to the point where your wisdom has come back to me through other people.
Hmm.
So my sis, Keena Reed.
Oh, hey, Keena.
Yeah, that's my sis. I love her. She was
Mm,
like, she said that my sis Brittany said that every black person should have an ancestral board of directors. And I
mm.
said, I'm gonna tell her that because I've walked it. I have been just it's blessed me in ways I can't describe. So I just want to say I appreciate the work that you're doing. The things that you walk in, the ways that you embody what it is you talk about, because again, liberation is nothing without authenticity. And I appreciate you leading the way in that. One of the things that I say, at least on this side, and I try as imperfectly as I can to amplify the voices of black women. Um, where the black women are leading, I want to be learning because there's so much wisdom and power and just so much greatness there. And so I just want to honor you in these few moments to let you know that your work, who you are, and what you do are both
I
valuable.
appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah. For those who may be experiencing, listening to, and are like, man, I need to connect, build with, find out more, support. How can people get in touch with you?
Yeah. So I am on Instagram at Brittany Janay underscore liberated love notes. On the web at BrittanyJanay.com and also on LinkedIn. Uh, I want to shout out Living Corporate because Living Corporate is the network that also hosts the Liberated Love Notes podcast, which is
Mm,
on something like sabbatical right now, but certainly there is an archive of episodes that are intended to be nourishing,
mm,
affirming, and certainly invite critical self reflection for Black folks, for us. Um, yeah, that's where you can find me. And I actually found, so earlier I mentioned, this might be a good place to close out. Earlier I mentioned the brilliance of some of the young people that I've had the pleasure of working with here at City Schools and this body of work around power to the young people. Well, we
mm,
had them like write a vision statement for like what that is.
mm.
And if you don't mind, Bobby, I found it. I was like, I wonder if I can find it real quick. I found it.
Please.
And I would certainly just invite educators to imagine, based on what I share, just like what this could look like and feel like in their ecosystem, because love
Yeah.
looks like believing, you know, what young people say
Yeah.
um, they need and what they envision. And so the young people here in Baltimore City's Youth Ambassador Program, they shared that power to the young people feels like freedom. It looks like enthusiasm. Power to the young people is giving everybody a choice, which feels like being part of a community. Power to the young people is being yourself. It looks like having a voice for yourself. Power to the young people feels like having independence amongst yourself and your peers. It means making decisions that benefit yourself and those around you. It's being heard and understood by adults. Power to the young people means that us young people have a say in many and every situation. If we speak our minds, we can make things happen. Power to the young people looks like independence, feels like confidence. Power to the young people looks like every student having freedom to be who they want. Power to the young people feels like our past, future, present. No segment in society can match with the idealism, enthusiasm, and courage of young people. That was August 2022 when they penned that um, in our camp last year. And so that even felt like that invitation, because we asked them, y'all, what does power to y'all look like, feel like? How would you experience that? That invitation to imagine was a love practice. That
Yeah.
invitation to tell us what they needed, what it would look like, and then build around it eventually, um, was a love practice.
I think educators who are listening, I just want to invite you to take, especially if you got a break coming up, a summer break, whatever we got to do to take some time for ourselves and really do that intrapersonal work that Brittany has called us to, has challenged us to. And then, in addition, from that space of embodying, seek to exist in community with others that build what we've just heard. I think if we can do that, we can embody love as a liberatory practice, as a leadership practice. Thank you, sis.
Appreciate you.
No doubt.